We are MythVision.
Home of MythVision podcast and MythVision radio group. My co-host is Derek Lambert. I'm Dr. Luther G. Williams. We're on Facebook, so give us a like. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, discuss, all that good stuff on YouTube. Folks, this isn't Jello wrestling at midnight. You can catch our PayPal and Patreon accounts, so don't let them slip out of your grasp, okay? Show us some warm and fuzzy, won't you? Coming up in the month of July, we've got an in-depth show with renowned mythicist scholar Dr. Richard Carrier. We'll be discussing his book entitled On the Historicity of Jesus. We've got two shows planned with Dr. Robert Price, a favorite with our viewers. We'll talk to him about the legacy of the Dutch Radical School and what it means to be a complete textual scholar. But none of that will happen unless you help us with the production of the show. Derek, chime in on how important it is for our viewers to help us.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, nothing's free in this world, as they say, but we have some special guests that we do bring on, and MythVision is trying to bring you the finest. It's been a goal of ours to try and bring you a variety of different guests. Yes, you may not see eye to eye with many of them, but it's always good to learn new things. And we like to provide, a way for people to come onto our platform. And you being able to help us through PayPal and Patreon by anything, $2, $5, whatever. If you wanted a monthly subscribe for $5 a month, you're helping us keep this platform going. So I really appreciate that, because we're able to help those who are scholars and those who are out there who are coming onto our show. We're able to do things to help them come on. And you guys are helping us bring you the finest. So Luther, that's pretty much all I have, brother.
Well said, Derek. It never ceases to amaze me who tunes into our program. We've intercepted on the cosmic plane the ancient Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. Josephus, we welcome you to the program. What's going on, man? You're a historian. What are you doing listening to a show on myth?
Hello, MythVision. I guess I've got everybody fooled. Those miraculous stories I wrote about in my Wars of the Jews never happened. That bit about seeing armies in the clouds at sunset is a calf giving birth to a lamb. That's just me using celestial imagery as a propaganda tool for my employers. Keep up the good work, guys, and don't take me or yourselves too seriously.
Wow, I don't know what to think now. We always think of Josephus as a historian. Our special guest today is a lot like that. We don't know how to categorize him. Just when you may think that he's a historian or a mythicist, he'll come out with some surprising opinions. He's author Michael Leto. Michael was born in a small town in Pennsylvania and was raised Catholic. By 1973, his itinerant family was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. There he got married and joined the Navy, serving on a nuclear submarine. He describes himself at this time as your basic math and science geek. In 1979, he successfully completed his time in the service and married. So the prison sentences are now over. Don't take me too seriously, the ladies in the audience. But at this point, when Michael wasn't following the Grateful Dead around, hey, love that he's a Grateful Dead fan. Me too. He was working as a subcontractor at various nuclear power plants and as a radiological controls technician or a radiochemistry technician. It was during this period that he took an interest in religion, asking God to show him the truth, which led to his atheism. Ouch. I asked God the same question and wound up doing this show. Go figure, right? But listen, even as an atheist, Michael still had an interest in biblical stories and read everything he could get his hands on, combing used bookstores in his travels before the internet was up. He gravitated toward discredited 19th century authors, seeing some good aspects within all of the bad. Michael wrote one modest book in 1995, published by the Atlanta Free Thought Society. He had planned on reviving the works of the prolific poet, writer, philosopher, and Egyptologist Gerald Massey, and rekindling interest in Massey's comparisons of the Bible to astrology. But the disorganized way in which Massey wrote caused Michael to really shelve the project for years. And it wasn't until he heard Richard Elliott Friedman speak on the hidden book in the Bible that Michael got his second wind. So his first step was to gather the needed background information on the stars and the constellations. And there was plenty of material available. It was just a matter of matching up dozens of stories to their proper stars and constellations. It didn't happen overnight, but once Michael figured out that there was a pattern to the stories, he was in the home stretch. He has written 2 books on celestial mythology called On Earth as It Is in Heaven. That was in 2009, and The Secret Astrology of the Bible the following year. They are both available on Amazon.com. Being his own worst critic, Michael will begin to revise and amend certain assertions, although he's still convinced that the Bible consists of many astral myths. Please welcome to MythVision Podcast, Michael Leto. Michael, it's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. I want to start out with an amazing new discovery, something that is a game changer that goes against everything that the scholars have told us about the origins of the constellations. They tell us the origins of the constellations was about the time of Sargon, 2000 BC or so. Makes sense because they look at the constellations, how they're arranged. You got Taurus there in the spring for the plowing. You have Libra there as the autumnal equinox for weighing of the crops. It all makes sense that this was the period I was in. So they tell us it was the Babylonians that started all this. However, the Greeks tell us it was the Egyptians. How would they know? I mean, compared to our scholars, right? So I have the Egyptian spider rock. Let me see if I can get this screen launched for you. Okay. Anyway, if you Google Egyptian spider rock, can you see the screen?
Nope. Go ahead. I can edit this, so don't worry.
No, hold on. Let me we'll get it. We'll get it. I had this. Damn it.
Hit share and then desktop.
Okay, I got to go to the big screen and then do the share. Okay.
Yep.
How's that? We got that share now?
You're good.
All right. That's the Egyptian spider rock. And if you Google it, that's what it's going to come up with. And they'll tell you this is all types of different things. There's one guy who actually measures the angles of these and tells you how it was astronomical, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's amazing. You know, this is like refrigerator art. There's some things you got to remember about ancient astrology. Is number one is that the constellations were never drawn to scale. Sometimes they're not even in the right place. And it rarely do they even look like what they're supposed to be. So that's, you know, so if you're trying to, so anybody who comes along and does the measurements on these rocks, they're out to lunch. All right. So what I did was I used a technique that I learned from in kindergarten and then carried on, is that if you take a picture of something, you adjust the resolution on it, you can get better scaling on it to where you could just take your penny pencil and color it in and see what it actually looks like. So when you do that on this one, all I did was color in the lines and come up with something like this. And this is an astrological symbol. Now, what you have to remember in ancient times, you have to know something about ancient stuff. And one of them is that we do have an actual spider on the spider rock. There is one and one only. And that is in the constellation of Ophiuchus. And if you read Richard Allen Hinckley's book on star names and goes into the legacy, he tells you it used to be a spider. Now, a lot of times it's like a half a sentence you can get him. We have a bird down here where Scorpio would be. Sometimes Scorpio is represented as a bird. What we also know is Hercules, constellation of Hercules used to be fields. And in the Bible, these were the fields that were given to Abraham. Abraham was a combination of both Hercules and these fields. The rock is broken right here. This was a line that separated the land of Hercules and the land of Lot. Ophiuchus would also become a field. So these would both be fields separated by a boundary line. That's what we have from the Old Testament. This is supposed to be somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 BC, probably more like 6,000 to 8,000, because right in the middle, we have the Libra scales. I would assume this would be the summer solstice. And the scales in Egypt were not for measuring crops, but this was for measuring, if you remember in the Book of the Dead, they used the scales to measure a man's the heart, to see if he can go on into the afterlife. So this was like a New Year's, like Janus in Rome, forward, backwards, probably a reflective time for when they could make their New Year's resolutions back around 7,000, 8,000 BC. Over in this one corner, we have like a face of Leo, which is really, it's really sad refrigerator art. I kind of overextended the bug up here, the scarab up for Cancer, but the most interesting part was right here, is Virgo. We have her sitting right here with a woven dress, which sometimes they call the spider, and she has outstretched arms. This is the constellation Coma. They combine the constellations all into one constellation here. Normally this is Isis holding the baby Horus. However, we can see she's wearing the crown, and this would be the crown of Lower Egypt, which is the northern crown, which is probably better off over here. This is significant because this is the first, this is not really Isis. Let's look at Isis. Let me see if I can pull that up on another one. That's the planisphere of Dendera from about 50 BC or so. And in that one, oh, that's Isis with Coma. It's very similar to what we have on this very ancient one.
It hasn't loaded yet.
Huh?
It hasn't loaded yet. We still see the same screen.
Okay. You don't have the Coma in Dendera screen?
All we have is the same one that you first started showing us.
The spider rock.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure how to.
Can you minimize this one, or yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Minimize that. Okay, now it's back to you.
All right, let's go back to the share again. Let me see if I can do hit the share.
Okay.
How about now?
Coma and Dendera.
Coma and Dendera, yeah. This is from about 50 BC. And what we see here is almost identical to what it is from the 7,000 something BC. And that is amazing itself, that over thousands of years, they basically have the same constellation, the same way. However, if you notice on Isis right here, she is not wearing the red crown. Isis never wore the red crown. All right, we have to go back. Now let's go back, see if we can go back to the other one. Oh, I almost hate doing this.
You're looking good
on the other one. You got the old one?
Yep.
Original one back up? Okay. So here she's wearing the northern crown. This is very significant because Neith wore the northern crown. So this went from Neith to Isis. Now, the significance of all this is, and there's multiple significance. Let's first talk about the northern crown. The northern crown is that spiral-shaped one that goes around in a curlicue. It's part of a maze. The northern crown represented the maze that Dionysus went through in Greek mythology, and I identify it as the constellation of Tamar, where she has the twins, and the one sticks his hand out. They tie a red string to it, pulls it back in, and then the other child came out without the red string. All right, the red string is the same as the red crown. It's circular, and this is womb imagery. The string and the curlicue represents the umbilical cord in the womb of the child, and this is almost universal throughout Europe and Egypt. That is what it is, and you'll see women wear that little maze thing. Okay, you know, the ones with that don't shave their armpits. They got that on there, and they're part of Greenpeace, and hey, they like that little maze, ancient maze imagery. So that's where this comes in. Now this is part of your prophecy. This is Horus. Horus is going to be all these wonderful things: Prince of Peace, King of Kings, Sultan of Swat. You know, all those superlatives that you could possibly fit into one sentence that only Dickens could get away with. And then this goes on. This same prophecy goes on into the book of Isaiah. Remember Isaiah, where it predicts the coming of the young girl will conceive. And then this was used in the Bible as a prophecy for the coming of Jesus. So here we have, probably around 8,000 BC, we have the prophecy of the coming of Jesus right here, if that's what you want to believe. But yeah, this is that. So Isaiah, and they had this big discussion. Atheists love to talk about it being the young girl and how it's mistranslated into virgin, because these guys who spoke Hebrew and Greek as their first languages, they didn't know the difference, right? They obviously mistranslated. No, they mistranslated it correctly. God, I hate air quotes. But they did that. They did that because they recognized it was part of this prophecy of the virgin. So when they translated the woman as being the virgin, it was because it was Virgo. That's what this is. Now, if you're one of those ancient astrology guys, hey, you can have here, you can have your spaceship launching pad, and you can have the spiders from Mars. Or
that's right.
If you're in this section, it'd be the spiders from Marduk. Okay.
Yeah. I like
that was his 12th planet. But yeah, I mean that's what this here is about. It goes into the now Eve. I don't bring this up, but this goes into the she was now Neve. One of the things they talk about Neve, if you can find some Egyptian books, is that she was androgynous. They're saying she might have been also male, and they say, no, this can't be so. Somebody messed up, because she also has the title Mother of all the gods. So how could she possibly be male? The same is true with Ishtar. Ishtar was also supposed to be both male and female. And this is because they represented the planet Venus also, which the morning star, we're keeping this simple. The morning star was the male, and they were both the goddess of war. So in the morning, when the Venus comes up in the morning, the troops would assemble and they would go out to battle to have war. She was also the goddess of love. So in the evening, she'd be the female. Venus would come out in the evening also. Rome had did not go into that androgyny stuff. They were a little different. So the evening one was Venus, and the morning one was named Lucifer. So in Isaiah, where they have the light bringer, which should have been Ishtar, he translated anachronistically as Lucifer, but he recognized it as being the morning star when he did that. And had he not done that, we would have probably never got Louis Cypher and the great movie Serpent and the Rainbow. But that's where all this came from, the morning and evening androgyny of Venus. Now Ishtar, this is also Eve, who is a representation of Ishtar. And if you go, and you can look this up in Wikipedia, Eve comes from Heva from the Hittites, Heva or Heba. This goes back to the Hurrians, Hepat. If you're online looking up it on your Wikipedia, and then this actually Hebat goes back to the Hurrians. It goes back to a woman, Kuba, who lived. She lived before Sargon territory. She was the only Sumerian queen listed in their books, and she was deified. She was deified and combined with the goddess of Ishtar and given the title Mother of Us All. And this is what and there's pictures of her online too, where they made sculptures on it. So if you want to go back to where Eve came from, she actually came from a real woman, the mother of us all, from the Sumerians. And that aspect's really not in my book, but that's something I've discovered since then, since reading Wikipedia. So all this is simple. Anybody who has a penny pencil and can trace, can go online, look at what the scholars looked at, trace it in, and come up with saying, hey, what you have is totally wrong. You hosed it, all right? This is not the spider rock. All right? Now, there are spider rock cultures all across, mostly in the New World. I would suggest, my guess is the spider rock cultures developed when the spider symbol was part of the summer solstice. That would make sense. We're looking at this 8 to 10,000 BC era or so, and that's when had all your major migrations happen. This is when when they came across the Bering Strait, went down into the New World, which is where all your spider cults are located. That is my guess, that this was the universal symbol that came out of the Caucasus or wherever, Antonia, Gölbekli Tepe, that this is where this probably came from at that region. And everything spread out with the Indo-European languages and down to the Semites and there. But there's very little in common astrological wise that we have with the New World and we have with Australia, and everybody who says otherwise is probably out to lunch. Simply because, like Australia is separated from us 50,000 years ago as far as the human population is concerned. That's from DNA sequencing. We know this pretty much for fact. And I like facts. If you can't get around the facts, I don't even want to hear it. But so anything that they would have in common with the rest of the world would have been from maybe 50,000 years ago. And I just don't see it. So, but you can make comparisons from all the way from Egypt to India and all through Europe. I would say they're all legitimate mythological comparisons. And in fact, there's so many books out there on common myths in this area. It's just incredible. So yeah, they have certain things in common, and most of the myths they have in common concern the vernal equinox and the summer solstice. So what you have are creation myths, flood myths, and the myths of fighting with the dragon. And those are the very common myths that go in between there. You get outside of that, and the whole thing falls apart. Okay. Questions at this point?
Okay. Derek?
I could track that pretty well. I mean, obviously, it raises some interesting ideas. It really does. And I thought we were going to ease our way in. There was no foreplay in this conversation. This thing went all the way right off the bat.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is a game changer.
It is.
Right.
It is.
Right.
Nobody warned me on that one. This is
No,
really.
I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to have your initial reaction. I told you Spider Rocket's a game changer, but that was about it.
I like
Oh.
what you. I like what you're saying here. So technically, what you're saying is they used a different. I think Randall or not Randall. Carl Sagan said something about how different cultures used different animal motifs, but they all used a similar zodiacal structure for celestial, on earth as it is in heaven type of motifs. This is like before the most common, I guess you'd say, the most newest structure we have, correct? This is a pre I don't know what you would call this. This goes further back, though. Wouldn't you say
This
that?
is the oldest symbols that we have of the zodiac that we can positively identify as being part of the zodiac. So this predates all the Babylonian stuff. This says,
Right,
hey, this
right.
actually comes from Egypt, not Babylon. So
Mm-hmm.
all the theories that I have about it coming out of Babylon are incorrect. This is saying the old Greeks, they were right. They knew what the heck they were talking about. And
But
I love how Virgo is almost the same as what it is thousands of years later. And Leo, well, sorry, I mean, this is refrigerator art, and a lot of people they'll look at this and they'll get the angles of these lines and stuff, and that it's totally meaningless. It's one lady, she saw this and she said, "Oh, this is the star Sirius." I give her points for like not going into the jumping on the spider rock stuff, but that's wrong too. I mean, this stuff is kind of obvious as to what it is, and you can blow it up and color it in yourself and see if you come up with the same thing. I mean, it's not. And so now your homework now for your term paper is to go find a rock online somewhere and color it in and come up with something that's a total game changer. And anybody can do it. And my advice to all the PhDs out there is when you start to color them in, use the wax crayons. It's easy to get clean off the screen. So,
Michael,
that's a little humor there.
If you don't mind me,
pretty good.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Derek.
Something that just makes me wonder. I did not realize that Hercules was once a celestial motif for fields. And what I find very interesting when you're looking at old stories like Abraham, Moses, and things throughout the Old Testament, and of course Adam and Eve and the flood, the deluge and everything. So star names, is that where we go?
This is the Bible. This is what I use mostly to write my book. I would look in here and I would look for the little things that he would say, like, oh, Hercules, the kneeling man, he was this, he was that, and oh, he was also a field. It'd be like half a sentence in there type of something else.
That's right. That's Alan. Yeah.
Yeah. He's kind of like the gospel when it comes to Star Lords and myths. There is a website I'll plug that I also use, run by Ann Wright. Her name spelled with an A and an E. She's out of Australia. I communicated with her quite a bit, and she has a lot of information from this book and others on her website. And I used it because he doesn't have actually everything in it. There is some other stuff that's out there that other guys, I think a guy named Robinson wrote, and I couldn't get a hold of their book, so I ended up using her website for that. But
Michael, have you seen Ian Ridpath's book or Deborah Holding? They've also got some material very close to this. I think probably not as in depth as Alan.
I have other books. I don't know who wrote them on this, on Star-Lord and stuff, and I have found nothing that compares to Alan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's kind of like the guru on this stuff. I would say most of their stuff is kind of watered down versions of what Alan has.
Right.
From what I've seen.
So let me ask you a question.
And why,
I don't know if this was involved, Michael, in anything we were going to talk about, but, till this day, we still have a struggle between, believing Christians and Bible believers, whether it's Jews or Christians who are defending the Exodus that took place. And then you have the scientists who are saying, hell no, there's no way that many people came across this place and they weren't slaves in Egypt and blah, 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 right? Is this a celestial myth here? Is this why people are confused and they're really arguing past one another because they're not even knowing what they're looking at?
Of course it's a celestial myth. I'm the guy who believes everything is a celestial myth. I mean, what? I mean, I go to, I went to Biblical Archaeology Review. They have seminars, and I went to a number of these seminars with the PhDs and stuff like that. And I talked to the guys in the universities who teach the Bible, and basically they don't believe the Exodus happened, simply because of the Hebrew language itself. There's no words in it that are Egyptian, they would have been Egyptian idioms and words and phrases that would have infused themselves into the Hebrew language. And it just isn't there. It doesn't exist. There's no way they could have been in Egypt all that time. Now, if you want to talk about the, let me see if I can pull something else up on this. But yeah, it is basically hold on, let's pause this for a second. Let me get off here.
While you're looking that up, I think this is important to say. If we're looking at it in the way you're presenting it, it did happen technically in the stars. However, it did not actually happen on Earth. So it's kind of like a win for both sides, if you will. So everybody can stop arguing now, right?
Yeah.
It happened, but it didn't. Okay, enough said.
The famous Lambert Compromise. I'll take it.
It happened in the stars. It happened. It's like the on Earth, like I said, on Earth as it is in heaven.
Hey, Michael, I was sold as soon as I discovered the Eridanus River was up there as I was studying the constellations, and I immediately connected it philologically to Jordan, because both have this root that means descent. And I said, wait a minute, Jordan, Eridan, in Hebrew, it would have started with a yod, and therefore Eridanus. I said, wait a minute, all this stuff is in the stars. I've been hooked ever since.
I have the Eridanus River as the Nile in the myth, and I kind of leave the Jordan River out of it. If it was in the book, it would have been probably somewhere in Pegasus. I can't see. I gotta have that here somewhere. Yeah, there it is.
And what are we looking for, Michael?
All right, I got it. I don't know. All right, we're going to share this right now. There we go. You got that now? Oh.
Yep.
All right. Now what happened, they created a false history. This is why the Bible, the Old Testament was spectacular. They're the only ones who actually did that. You have other areas. They created, they have the cosmic myths, but they never put them together in one big story as a history in a contiguous matter. This is where the Bible is unique in that point. This is the end point of all your astro myths. This is where it comes, and you could use the Bible to figure out just about any astro myth from the Indo-European Semitic region, if you just know a little bit about what's going on. The Nile, the Eridanus River, is right here, floats around. There is something known as the ostrich basket or ostrich nest right at the front. This is the basket that Moses has found floating down the river in. There's an eggshells up here where somebody had died. This is the slaughter of the innocents. So Moses, he kills the guy and he runs off to Midian, which is up here. This is where Joseph, see, Joseph was here. The story of Joseph ends right here in Taurus. Back up a little bit. He was in Taurus. I think in the original text, the brothers did not recognize him. He recognized his brothers. He gave them what they needed. He threw a little don't trip on the way out, which was a little joke that he had in there. And the Hyades in Taurus, Romans had as a sow feeding her piglets. And that's what basically this was Joseph was feeding his siblings. They were feeding off him. And when he was taken out of the pit, he was taken by the Midianites. And as you see right here is Midian next to here, and they dropped him off in Egypt. Now we got to get from Egypt. Now we got to get out of Egypt. So the next story starts here in Egypt. Moses goes up to Midian where he meets his wife, Zipporah. Zipporah, which means bird or fowl.
Right.
And in ancient Babylon, it was shown that this was the constellation was actually a bird that was sitting on the back of Moses. So we have that connotation there. The brightest star in the Pleiades is, was it Cepheus, who was the wife of Poseidon and also was a harpy, a little bird-like creature. And also to connect us to the Pleiades is Moses' wife was one of 7 sisters, although the Bible doesn't say 7 sisters. It says her father had 7 daughters. So you have to figure that out. A lot of people have trouble with that. So we go up here. The burning bush is the head of Medusa. It oscillates. It's an oscillating one in as far as the brightness. It goes several magnitudes of brightness. I don't know how they possibly could have seen that back then, but apparently they did. And the head of Medusa was also known to have to speak. And this is where he meets God up here in the burning bush. And this is a very evil sign. This is a satanic sign. This is evil. So when Moses leaves and comes back, what happens is we have this odd scene in the Bible where God is wrestling with Moses and tries to kill him. Not exactly part of any sermon that I've ever heard, although honestly I haven't heard many, but it just doesn't play into your normal theology. They tend to like brush over this. They skip it. Some of your Bible scholars say, well, it really wasn't Yahweh. It was maybe it was like an angel or something, and they miswrote this. But anyway, he tries to kill Moses. And to me, that's a major plot point. I don't know about you, but God trying to kill somebody who he wants to do his work is a major plot point.
Yeah, Michael, the atheists don't miss it. We belong to some of those groups on Facebook, and they make a lot of points about that.
Yeah. So they come back, go back here to the beginning, and we had this odd scene where Gershom is suddenly circumcised. And there's this funky phrase in there that he threw it, where they translated that they threw the circumcision the skin at Moses's feet. And actually, the literal Hebrew translation is she touched his foot, or it could have been or feet. There's no plural in Hebrew. So I'm looking at foot right here is the foot of Orion, and we know about the heel of Orion. And this is where she touched Gershom's foot with the knife. That's how that should be translated. And literally, that's how it would be translated, except the scholars don't like that. We go through here, the Nile. We have the plagues. One of these stars is the frogs. Has to do with frogs. So we end up with the plagues. And then when we get to the Red Sea, the crossing point is actually down here at the bottom. There is a bridge here, a land bridge. The literal translation is the hand of Yahweh pushed back the soldiers of the Pharaoh. So this is, you have a hand, or a paw in this case, on the Nile River. This is where they would be pushing back.
Right.
So this gets them over into the desert. And here we have where this would be Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai would be the star Mira. And if you remember, God was not always there all the time. They had to walk around the mountain, say certain things, and then get him there. Well, the odd thing about this star is that this star is oscillating also. And it's not always visible. Sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's not visible. So it's just like God was on Mount Sinai. Another thing I just recently discovered is that Marduk, who I connect to Moses, one of his tasks was to make a constellation disappear. In constellations, the stars are basically the same thing. And that would be probably this star right here that he would make disappear. And then from here, he moves up and he conquers the Amorites, which was right here. Aries was the symbol Amaru. This was where the Amorites were typically associated with the constellation of Aries. And then he moves down to Moab, where you have the ring. There's a ring that is the binding to your enemies, which is what happened where they went into the Moabites, where they intermarried with them. And then the burial of Moses, what they say about the burial of Moses is no man knows where he is at.
Right.
And that means there's no star for it. That's one of their keys. There's no star for it if no one knows where it's at.
Love that. Like, great translation.
If it's there until this day, means there is a star for it. All right? That's what it means. Your oceans and your land points are down here at the bottom. Your plains generally run through the middle here. This area right here tends to be hills, and then you go up into the upper regions. Those are mountains and your towers. So it has certain geographic qualities of the constellation.
Question, Michael, you got Mount Sinai down here, and I thought the burning bush was on Mount Sinai, but I could be mistaken.
No, he did the burning bush when he went to visit his wife.
Right.
I mean, that was up here in Midian.
Okay.
I don't know. It could be, but this is where the burning bush is at, and this is where the Mount Sinai was when he was in the desert.
Okay.
Michael, why is Cetus the sea monster the guardian of the wilderness? He's got his paw on the river, and he's sort of the gateway to the wilderness. In other words, you can't talk about the wilderness without talking about that constellation of Cetus the sea monster. Why is that? And tie that into us. Tie that in for us with the number 40. What's the significance there? You have a good insight.
The number 40 is a constellation number that they used. 40 years or 40 days meant that's how much time they spent in that constellation. And then it tells you to move on to another constellation. Cetus is the desert because there's very few stars in it. It's very open up, very blank. That's why they made it the desert. And
Okay.
I believe this is some scholars say this is the monster Tiamat that was slain by Marduk. I believe Moses is derived from the word Mysis, from the Assyrian word meaning hero, which was they applied to the Babylonian god Marduk, who was very prominent. And they just changed the I to an O. And I have another whole theory on that. I don't want to go into it this time. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later in the show. But yeah, that's all that had to do. They were very similar. If you read in the book of Psalms, Psalm says that Egypt was Rahab. Rahab was the monster. That was the monster right here. And Cetus was the monster that was slain by Marduk, his most famous feat. Now, Marduk was then combined with this guy named Sargon. They deified Sargon, and they deified his grandson, both Naram and Sin, and they combined him with Marduk. Now,
which Sargon? There were two. Which?
Sargon the Great, back around 2500, 2400, 2200 BC or so.
Okay, that's the first Sargon. Got you.
The first Sargon, yeah, not the later Assyrian guy. The first one who started who had him write all these books on astronomy and astrology.
Right.
At the vernal equinox, and that's what this is all about. This is all about the vernal equinox, the celebration of Passover. And even the word Passover, the Paschal celebration comes from the Akkadians. And Sargon would lead the Akkadians. He would don the cloak of Marduk, and he would lead them in a play, their own little play for the vernal equinox. And they ended up deifying him. They combined him with Marduk, and his story is the same. His birth start narrative is the same. He was found floating down a river in a basket. Same as Moses. And he's combined with Marduk. And if you read this guy named Joseph Campbell, one of the things he'll tell you is that this story of Sargon being placed in a basket and float down the river is a cosmic myth. Now, he never says where that cosmic myth is. He doesn't go into any details, but he says, yeah, it's a cosmic myth, and you can just make your own connection to Moses yourself as being a cosmic myth.
Yeah, it seems to me that a lot of guys, even Joseph Campbell, would have, I've heard a lot of people who try to shy away from making Bible characters or even going towards Christianity. They'll lump all these religions together showing, celestial myth, but then you start getting to stuff like Christianity or New Testament or, let's shy away from that. Too much criticism. Nowadays, we're kind of able to freely discuss these things because to me, if I were to take and just a logical continuation of what you're saying, these 40 days, these motifs of the slaughter of the innocent, all that's in Matthew. All that's in the New Testament. All that's talking about Jesus. He's copying Moses. He's copying Old Testament celestial myths. And here we are right back into another celestial myth in the New Testament. So I know that's not where we're headed with this because really just showing the old, you can show in the new's copying the old. But just dealing with the old is so important. I think it's great. I love that you're showing this right here, telling us the story of Joseph and then Moses. I was wondering if you have the story of Samson by any chance. I don't know if that's something you had prepared, but I know for a fact his name meaning little son. That's an obvious one. I know a lot of esoteric teachers and celestial myth guys are always pointing to him saying, this is cosmic. This is obviously celestial.
Well, Samson comes from the Babylonian sun god Shamash. All right, and the reason why sun gods are judges is because when the sun comes up, you can now judge things. There are certain characteristics of sun gods is that they had, they liked women, and they went out there and they had a very strong appetite for women.
I can't
and
believe
we
that.
see this in the judge Samson and the sun god. Now his story breaks from. Let me see if I can pull this up again. His story breaks from the tradition, the way that I was writing the Bible and how things went. His story actually repeats a lot of the constellations that was there. So his story starts with Leo again, and where he was born. Leo, you have the story about the brother, right? Or not the brother, but the lion. Remember, he kills the lion, and he has the bees in the lion. Right at the mouth of Leo, there is a constellation known as the beehive.
Right.
Although technically, from what I know, that constellation is a modern nomenclature for the beehive.
Okay.
So I'm kind of like, okay, here we have it in ancient times. Does that mean they knew about the story of Samson, or how did that work in there?
Michael, the beehive was also called the manger. Alan talks about it as it had the other name of the manger. It was nested in Cancer the crab there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in the Old Testament, that was the place where the servant slept, Isaac's servant, when he went to go get his wife. It's the same place, the manger. I don't have that. So anyway, yeah. So it goes from there. He gets tied to Virgo. Virgo was his first wife, gets tied in the tail to her. They added the part about a barren birth on Samson, which seems to have been added to the story. That is Cancer, is this constellation of the barren birth. So he goes through there. He goes through his story. Actually, most of it is in Aquarius. This is why, and they set it up in order to get into Aquarius. The southern fish of Aquarius was the point of the old winter solstice, where the sun god would have lost all of his hair and was blinded. That's classic winter solstice imagery, where he loses his hair. His hair was actually the rays of the sun. That's what gave him his power. So when they cut that off and they blinded him, that was the winter solstice. And the star in the southern fish also represented the temple of Dagon, which is where he was. So we have this coincidental thing in ancient times. Aquarius was also an ass in ancient times also. He takes the jawbone of the ass, hits the water, and all this water comes out, and that's where you see all that water coming out of Aquarius. And there's also connections to some of the constellations around him. One is he is tied up with ropes made out of new flax, and that's a Pisces reference, the ropes in Pisces and the flax. So there's aspects that go into Pegasus and around Samson. So yeah, that whole story was designed to give us a story on the winter solstice.
Kind of thought that already too, and that's pretty cool. I always thought that was interesting. Michael, tell us something interesting. What is something pertaining to the celestial?
Well, I haven't done enough yet.
Oh no! I'm just trying to. I'm trying to get some of your favorites, because You know, I could tell you mine and ask questions pertaining to that, but maybe you could delve into some interesting things you don't think a lot of people are aware of when it comes to this that you like.
The story of Cain and Abel. I like that one. That may not even been part of the original Bible. I don't know, but it's a story. It's the constellation is Centaurus, and you can see him stabbing in the side an animal. So if you want to know what Cain used to kill Abel, he used a spear. All right, that's what the constellations would tell us. Not a rock, a spear. So, and that cosmically is the same spear that speared Jesus in the side. Because right down below Centaurus is the Southern Cross. That Southern Cross was the mark of Cain, and we know that from the Midrashim, which told us it was like a tau. It was like a capital T. So the cross of Jesus was the mark of Cain. Kind of odd thing, but that's what that was. And that whole area was the passion of the Christ. You have, and right above that was Libra, which was the trial. Right next to that was Scorpio, which was Judas. Above was Ophiuchus, was the healer, right? That would be Nicodemus. You go up even further, you have the Northern Crown, which is the crown of thorns, and you have the garnet star of Arcturus, which I identify as the robe, the mocking robe that they put on him. In the Old Testament, I identify Arcturus as the coat of many colors, or at least the coat of one color that Joseph had.
I have to ask Mike. I gotta ask you this, man. You got me excited hearing this. Okay, so Earl Doherty. I gotta get into mythicism for just a second with you on this because I think this is an important question. Earl Doherty has he had a theory, that a mythicist theory, that Jesus was neither a man nor God, not Yahweh, but some angelic being. Okay, he plays an angelic role, right? And it appears to me, if you've got any taste of people who've done the celestial myth in the New Testament, and like reading Devil's Pulpit or something to these guys, my question is this: Does all this that what you're saying kind of give way to their idea of a celestial Christ, a pre-existent, crucified in the heavens type of idea of a Christ figure? And I'm sure you've heard these discussions before, but that's what the debate boils down to. Is Christians say a man was born, he really lived, he really died, he really got speared in the side and wore a crown of thorns and wore this robe and was crucified on a cross and ended up in a tomb and rose again from the dead. All this happened here on earth. This could not have happened in the heavens. This could not be some pre-existent crucifixion idea, even though you read in the passages in like Revelation, it says he was crucified before the foundations of the earth. That makes me think this thing happened somewhere other than earth. I don't know why, but what are your thoughts?
There's a lot of writings out there. I think Eusebius writes about Christians who believed in Christ before he existed, the Coptics and stuff like that. If you look at the Gnostics, they will tell you that, yeah, Jesus did this, that, and the other, and they will agree with you 100%. But if you ask them if they thought he existed, they say, well, no. But the stories are all correct. Okay, they'll agree with you on the stories. So it's like, how do you reconcile that? It's like, okay, and the only way I can see how they can reconcile that is that they believed it was a cosmic myth. I find that really easy to do. If they want to believe that Jesus actually existed, it's possible that man actually existed, that they attached myths to. But I can there's two things that we know for certain that didn't happen that are myth. One is his miraculous virgin birth. That was all cosmic myth. Bethlehem literally means house of bread, and that would be the sign of Virgo, the virgin. You go into Cancer, which has the manger there. It also has a star that represents the ass. I mean, this is clearly the cosmic myth. You go into Orion, which is Nimrod. You have the belt of Orion, which is the three wise men that are walking toward the star Sirius, which was the star of the east. I mean, this is all right there. This is the big cosmic myth. The other myth is the crucifixion, the whole passion play. And this is, if you ever read I think there's a book called The 33 Crucified Saviors that go into all these different savior gods that were crucified. And the reason why they have that is because it's a myth. And like I went through that whole thing before with the Southern Cross and everything else. Now, the thing about the Christian myths is that Jesus was a solar god, unlike Yahweh, which was a lunar god. So when you're looking at the mythology and you're placing it in time, you're looking at the constellations that appear right before sunrise. So you're looking at, for instance, for Easter, this is why you have your sunrise worship service, so you can see the Southern Cross, which we can't see anymore from our latitude, but you could see it in Jerusalem in 33 AD. But right now we can't see it. But back then you could, because all that stuff changes. But yeah, that's where this comes from. So the fact that his constellations take place right before sunrise would indicate he is a solar deity. That and the halo that he has is solar. All right, that's what that means.
Okay, this transition, Michael, from lunar to solar. Goldsher, who wrote a famous tome called The Mythology of the Hebrews, says that lunar gods were primarily nomadic, and as people transcended the desert and they created cities by bodies of water, then obviously they didn't have to travel by night, by the cool of the night, and they were now making their living through agriculture, and they became solar worshiping people. So is that what's going on with Yahweh and contrasting him with Jesus, or let's say David and Jesus? David is another lunar god, is reflected in lunar deities, and Jesus in a solar. Is there also this thing about nomadic people and city dwellers going on there? Is that part of the dynamic?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, you had lunar gods that go all the way back. I will say that lunar gods tend to be Semitic, and in Indo-European cultures, they were females, and they were males in the Semites. And you go back to the city of Ur and the city of Haran, right? Which is where Abraham was from. Those were moon worshiping cities. So you're going back to where 3000 BC. Your first city, one of your oldest cities, was lunar. Now the Babylonians made things really confused because every city had its own god. Some were solar gods, some were lunar gods. One of them even worshipped the zoo bird, which was the Pleiades. And when they conquered another city, their god became the supreme god over the other gods. So whatever story that may have existed of their god being better had to be changed. All right. So they changed that to where the god of the conquering city became the supreme god. Now, if they got conquered by somebody else, then the narrative would always change again. So you had all these narratives, and it made it very, very confusing. Unlike Greece, which says, okay, you got Zeus here, and this is where everybody at, and you guys go fight all you want. It's not going to change the gods, all right?
Right.
Stories will change, but in Babylon, it was totally different. They changed this all around. So the moon god, the lunar god, was big during the early Bronze Age, but then when Hammurabi came in, he liked Marduk, and Marduk was a solar god. He was identified with Jupiter, and he was a specific solar god that was associated with the vernal equinox. So he was the hero of the vernal. That's where he was. He was big at that time. And one of the reasons why I thought the original biblical text, and I'm wrong on this, was written in the early Bronze Age is because all this information seems to be from the early Bronze Age to Middle Bronze Age period. So that's why I initially jumped on that. I spent a lot of time in my book discussing Bronze Age period and how this Bible was written in the Bronze Age. It's all wrong. It was not written in the Bronze Age. As a matter of fact, I've come full circle on that, and that's because of you, Dr. Williams. You said that one word to me. You said, "Can I give you that one word?" Plastics. Oh, no, that was William Blake. You said
yeah, not
politics. Yeah, you said politics. And I started thinking politics. Yes, politics. That's the way this was written. It was because of politics. So I started looking more at the data that's out there, and there is no record of Moses or David and Solomon in Jewish writing before the 3rd and 4th century. I mean, you have something known as the Elephantine Papyri, which talks all about Passover. Doesn't mention Moses once. Doesn't mention none of that stuff, which you would think would be in there. So all this writings came after this time. It came basically after the Greeks had invaded Judea, and so now I'm like, well, why did they make it look old? They would have had to have a library full of information, right? They would have had to have a library full of, maybe even Alexandria. I don't know. Maybe the Public Library of Jerusalem. I have no idea where they got it, but essentially there was a lot. They had a library full of information that they drew on. They made this thing look deliberately old, and then they added stuff to it to make it look like it was being updated. And it was like, gee, I'm not sure which theory is more incredible, whether this one or the Bronze Age one. I mean, they're both kind of incredible, but I have to go with the facts. And the facts is Bronze Age is out, even though they tried to make it look like the Bronze Age. And I spent a lot of time discussing the Bronze Age. Sargon's daughter, who was known as who we gave her the title, the Shakespeare of the ancient world, because she wrote so much. And I talk all about him and Naram Sin. I love Naram Sin. Oh, they should do a movie on that guy. He is great. But yeah, no, it's not. So now I have to rethink this whole thing. And there's a book there for you, Dr. Williams, if you care to go into it, on the conspiracy of how they wanted to go in it, because my next thing that I'm going to look at is the Neolithic times, trying to get all that stuff together. And I want to do a book called Evolution of Religion from Cave Porn to Jesus. So, something of that nature. I'm working title.
Love it.
Thank you, sir. I'm much appreciative of your consideration of me. Now, we got into this area about politics, and so that's my word now. So let's get into it now, shall we? The Old Testament stories written for the Hasmonean expansion. Derek, you should love this. I want Michael to talk a bit about the Hasmoneans and how they fashioned scripture, redacted scripture, used it, as you said, came up with these basic texts, made them sound old, made them sound revised, but there was a purpose behind it. What was that purpose?
My internet's messing up.
There you are.
Okay, we got you.
Okay.
We got you.
Yeah, I have a satellite connection, and sometimes they limit my bandwidth. I'll tell you what I need to do is I need to get rid of everything else that I'm running here.
Did you catch Luther's question by any chance?
Did you catch that question?
This is just a working theory that I just came up with. So I don't have everything into it, but one of the things I discovered is that the conquests of Joshua and the territories that he conquered is the same as the Hasmonean expansion. This is kind of like what they went into. We're looking at a couple hundred BC or so, 140 BC. We are 1 degree away from the constellations going from Aries to Pisces.
Yes, sir.
And what yeah, we are on the, and right now we're like 1 degree away going into Aquarius. But that's based on the Assyrian model anyway. But they had set up, and I think the rule was whoever was designated as the vernal equinox, whatever, let's go back. Zodiacs are called houses, right? This is because they represented houses of people, families were represented by the zodiac. This grew into cities. Cities were represented by constellations, particularly zodiac constellations. And then later this would evolve into nations. And nations would be represented by each specific zodiac constellation. You know, in ancient times, Taurus was Egypt. And then Aries became Amorites and / Babylon, which they attached to Greece also. If you see the Alexander, he would have the ram's horns on the coins and stuff. He was part of this Aries. So now we're moving into Pisces, the symbol of the 2 fish, which became the symbol of Christianity, which was the early symbol. They actually used 2 fish early on. This was the symbol of Pisces. This is the new era. So Pisces was going to have a new ruler. So what the Jews did was they created this, my theory is they created this book that made it look like came from ancient times, handed down by maybe God himself, that would say that the Jews were destined to rule this area. So they fought against the Roman Empire for 5 generations or so, for over 100 years, trying to fulfill this destiny. And we see that in the book of Revelation was supposed to be the culmination where they actually went and defeat the Roman Empire, which didn't happen. Now, I was reading a story on Julius Caesar, and there was a blurb in there that says Rome went and conquered this area to bring peace. They thought it was their divine destiny to bring peace to this region of Earth by conquering it and making it a state. So it's kind of funny how everybody is using God to justify their wars. But yeah, I believe that's what the Hasmoneans were doing. There are, for instance, Joshua has elements that would show it was Greek. It was written during the Greek time. The flax, the ropes made out of flax was Greek. The being hidden. They're hidden actually in the wings of Pegasus. This was Greek. The only thing that was not Greek was the original Pisces, which was the 2 fish. That was kind of universal. But the other details going into Pegasus, this is all Greek and would have had been written after the Greeks. Even some of the stuff, if you look at the blessings of the children of Jacob, how he disseminated the blessings. One of them, he gave Dan 2 specific blessings. He gave him the judge and the serpent, right? The judge was Libra, and the serpent underfoot was Scorpio. The Greeks had those 2 as 1 constellation, whereas Scorpio would be, the scales was actually the claws of Scorpio. All right, so the Greeks had that as 1 constellation. So they're putting this as 1 constellation because of the Greeks, but it was actually 2 constellations because the Babylonians had it as 2 constellations. So they're doing it both ways. There is a peculiarity that when you start matching up the suns to their zodiac sign, Reuben, the firstborn, the water wild as water one is Aquarius, right? Firstborn is Aquarius. And then when you figure it all out, Benjamin, the lastborn, is Capricorn. So you're looking at the first month of the year and the last month of the year in a calendar that the Romans created about 154 BC. Now,
oh my.
So yeah, because now you're asking, well, it could be a coincidence, right? So the coincidence of one being 1 is like 1 in 12, and you multiply it by 1 in 11 times the other one. So it'd be the odds of this happening coincidentally would be like 1 in 132, which is not astronomical, but you got to ask yourself, is this a coincidence, or is this me putting them together to be this way? Or, you know, I mean, there's a lot of ways you could figure this in, but I'm looking at now, if we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, that contain these verses, and they're only partial now, but that contain the verses of the blessings, they date from that period. So I'm wondering if the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually a place, Qumran was actually a place where they were manufacturing scripture and not just reproducing it. And we also know that there's 2 Psalms there from David that are not in the Bible, that are in the Dead Sea. Dead Sea Scrolls have 2 extra Psalms that were composed at a later date than the ones that are in the Bible right now. So they were doing something there, so they were doing some composing. And they have added verses to the Bible in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Just minor stuff, but yeah, they were composing.
2 quick points that would seem to add to your hypothesis. First, the Septuagint of Joshua lists his father as Nun. We know that he's the son of Nun. The gematria of Nun, which means fish, it's a word that means fish, is 153. Where have we seen that before? 153 fish. It's in John. It's Pythagorean. It shows Greek influence much later. And here it is in the story of Joshua, who is the son of Nun. Again, that would seem to argue for a late date, as you are saying. And then you go to the blessings in Genesis, what is it, 48, 49? 48, 49?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that, 49.
So.
Okay, and the father, Jacob, who's also Israel, says to his sons, let me tell you what will befall you in the last days. The numerical value of last days is 1290. Where have we seen that before? That's in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. 1290 days from the abomination of desolation till the temple is destroyed. Again, that is Greek gematria, Greek influenced gematria, right there in the Genesis 49 story. And we pretty much know that Daniel chapter 12 dates to the Hasmonean period. It dates to the early Hasmoneans, about 165, Maccabean period, 165 or so. So I think you're right on target.
Yeah, and later Daniel was actually written in Greek. So it's like, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure of the number. I told the folks no math, okay? But
I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry. Forgive me, folks. Derek, edit that stuff out. Nobody will listen to that.
Yeah, I started looking at that type of numbers, and I have a hard time getting into it, is because there's numbers all over the place, there's letters all over the place, and it's to me, you can make just about it's worse than my theory, is that you can make anything be what it wants to be if you want to do it. So I'm very hesitant to go down that road. So I kind of avoid it altogether in my writings. And I'm not denying it. There may actually be something there, but I'm kind of like on the fence about it. I like things simple. I like to keep things simple, and that starts to get a little bit more complexity for me. So, like tracing with your black thing on a screen, you know, to see what the constellations, what it really is. That's simple. Okay, that's fun.
Awesome.
But yeah, I can see where it's connected. There could be some connection there.
I think there definitely is, but obviously more research. We could do a show on that in particular at some point. I really, really, really enjoy what we've already discussed here. And now you're writing a book. You said, what is this book that you're going to be publishing here at some point?
I haven't started on it, but I'm looking at ancient symbols, cave art, trying to get some. Since we have what I started to show off in the beginning is a connection between ancient times, between the cavemen, the Neolithic art, and the modern Zodiac. So we see there's a lot of connection there. It goes back to that time. So the question is, how far back can we go with this? We know the migration patterns, and we know that it basically Gobekli Tepe is probably ground zero for where this stuff came from. Plus, that's the only place we got a monolith. Right. But yeah.
Yeah, I have my suspicions that there might be more that we're just not able. What we can put in concrete, it is not concrete, but in stone, I guess you'd say. It's there's so much I wish didn't get destroyed, weathered, natural disasters, possibly catastrophes that have wiped out during the Ice Age, the melting of the Ice Age. That, man, there's no telling. I always tell this to Luther, and I like to think like that, even though we like to stick with concrete evidence. We like to stick with what we can prove. But I told my wife one time, I sat in a Mexican restaurant. I was down in Georgia doing a job. And I said, honey, what if 40,000 years ago they had little food joints, and there was a man who, or no, let's say 40,000 years in the future, and a man sitting down and he says to his wife, honey, have you ever heard of the USA? And she's like, I mean, that was like a myth, a story about like a civilization that practically ruled the world. And he's like, I'm not so sure it was a myth. I think there was a place, and it was an amazing place, a civilization that really had its reaches across this world and influenced practically every civilization on this world. She's like, stop with that crap, honey. There's no concrete evidence to prove USA or the United States of America was really what you think it is. I mean, we know that we were hunter-gatherers 12,000 years ago, honey. And that's kind of how I think. I know I'm not saying that at one point there were satellites floating in outer space. I'm saying, though, we may have restarted, many times. I don't know. I mean, we may have had our points in the past where catastrophes have come in and kind of took us from where we were, and we went right back to square one. Scratch that stone. Okay, we got fire. All right. I'm just.
I have a hard time with that theory because simply advanced civilizations, if they were, they never got into metallurgy. You got to have metallurgy. You got to make stainless steel. You got to have all that good stuff, plastics and everything else. There's no record of this ancient civilization doing anything besides stone.
I'm not suggesting like this type of civilization, but I'm saying even as advanced possibly as the Greeks to some degree. Maybe we've had civilizations that have gone to this degree and then boom, retract back. I don't think they were building airplanes or possibly having cars necessarily. I'm just saying. I know that the Discovery Channel had something like after 10,000 years, what would happen? And the only things that we would recognize of human civilization if all life went extinct is, stone. Practically, that'd be the only thing, and it would be the Great Pyramid in Giza. And they say, what is the name of the where they have the presidents carved out on the
Mount Rushmore?
Mount Rushmore. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, that's the Discovery Channel once again. It's just,
yeah, Discovery Channel. They're out to lunch. They're like the History Channel too. It's like, when are we going to see some real history on the History Channel, other than World War II? You know, it's like, come on.
Yeah, I just kind of wonder before the Ice Age if these guys were tapping into some of these celestial myths, and how far back does this stuff go? You know?
Well, it all started. I like to think it all started. I don't know. Did you ever see the movie 2001?
Yeah.
And you got that
Love
man
it.
out there, right?
Right.
Now,
right.
in the book, he had a name, Moonwatcher, and that's when it started. When we were still hairy guys looking at the sun and the moon. That's when all the astro myths started. And it grew out of there, and it evolved, and we probably wouldn't even recognize what the initial ones were. But they kept it simple. And for instance, one is like resurrection and reincarnation.
Like we lost
Michael? Yeah, just when it gets juicy every time, right?
Yeah.
He drops this bomb, and then we lose him. Michael, are you there?
You were about to tell us the answers to the universe.
Sorry, folks, but got to hit that Patreon and PayPal.
Yeah.
You know?
Give it a second. I know he'll come back. He was just talking about death and resurrection. Maybe he died. He'll resurrect soon. You know.
Yeah, you're right.
Michael. Let's hope he pops back in.
All right,
we lost him. So he come back. We lost him for a second, guys. Look, something I want to hear, Luther, and this just has me fascinated. I was actually listening to a lecture. Someone was proving and showing how we have technically, I don't know if it would be called a gene, but a God gene. And he was explaining why humanity had come up with God, how we evolved and had came up with the concept of God in our minds. He says it's all natural. He explained why we developed these ideas, okay? Today we would evolve those ideas into further. But, okay, Michael's back. There he is.
Yeah,
hey, Mike, you're back, sir.
Yeah, hey, that's my wild blue internet connection there for you.
No, that's your impersonation of the Apostle Paul. He drops a bomb and leaves town. We're not going to let you do it.
No, tell us. You said death and resurrection. You were right there.
Yes. Death and resurrection comes from the sun setting and the sun rising. The Egypt, their land of the dead was in the west, where the sun set. That's where everybody went to die, was in the west. That's because the sun set there. It would resurrect in the east. It would come up again. And they had different, sun gods for the morning and the evening and everything else. And that's so you can look at reincarnation and resurrection as simple sun moving up and down. So those stories, it could be like universal throughout the world or other worlds, simply because that's what that is. It's just based on something's, a myth.
I think that makes sense, especially Easter Sunday. We know that's Easter Sunday, the idea of him resurrecting. But
I think it's named after Astor, but yeah.
I've heard Easter. But yeah, either way, question on
Easter sounds like presentism.
Yeah, it does. It does. Let me ask you this about the holidays, the holy days of the Bible. I've heard it said, and the argument has come from those who deny the mythological motifs that what we're talking about here. And they'll say, there's no dying and rising God motif here with Jesus. It's very unique. This is a historical guy. They just made this whole thing up pretty much almost like it's authentic to the Jewish version. Now, they say the only way that you could say that is if this had agricultural significance. They always throw that out and say, unless the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, are agricultural, you can't make the argument that this is another dying and rising god that is borrowing from other myths, because the other myths are agricultural. Are these myths agricultural in nature, based off of, like, I mean, everything that we're seeing with the Hebrew holidays, and do you see it agricultural in nature?
There is a lot of it is agricultural. I mean, the Passover and stuff like that. I'll give them that. However, I'm looking at one of the thing I was looking at agriculturally. I believe that Virgo was the constellation of the vernal equinox when it was created. That would make sense. Here she is, the Virgin, the opening of the Virgin, and this would be agriculturally related, although she goes into a time period before we had agriculture. So I'm kind of like struggling with the whole thing. They like that Virgin opening up of the Virgin of the spring. In the Bible, this is where the Amorite soldier kills his daughter. Right. This is in the constellation of Andromeda, which again was the sacrifice of the female virgin which is actually not a spring constellation, but kind of like right before spring. So when he kills his daughter, there are things that we look at. One of the things is she's a virgin. Well, what does that have to do with anything? So she goes up into the hills to lament her virginity, up into the hills. Oh, that's Andromeda, which is above the Zodiac, right? And one of the things that it describes, she's wearing these trembles, right, on the wrists and ankles, and that is similar to Andromeda, who was chained. Right? So we have these different aspects in there. I mean, it's not the same, but we have the similarities, and that's what you have to look for in comparing astral myths. Is not so much the story lining up and being same, but having certain points that are identical. And on the opposite of that is sometimes you get two stories that look identical that are nowhere related as far as cosmic myths go.
Okay.
I mean, you can have it both ways.
Wow.
My favorite one, I think I mentioned this to Luther before, is the Pisces, the Joshua. Right? In the Greek mythology is you have Venus and Cupid, or Eros was, or is it, anyway, anyway, the two of them are out swimming, right? And then this sea monster comes along, and then they turn themselves into fishes. So they want to stay together, so they tie a rope between themselves. And then they go hide from the monster, right? Well, this is a story of Jericho, which is nothing like this at all. We have Joshua, son of Nun. Nun can be plural, too. Fishes.
Okay.
Singular and plural. All right? And then they are the two spies. We have the number 2. They go and meet Rahab. Rahab is another name for sea monster. And then she hides them in a wall of flax. And they have to tell us it's flax. I'm not sure what the significance of the flax being that they hid these spies in, other than it's connected to the flax of the rope that was tied to the two fishes. So that, to me, when you have these idiotic little tidbits of information in the Bible that are totally meaningless in the story, the only thing I can think of, all of a sudden, it just astrological. And why?
Right.
Oh, astrological. It's, so why else would it be in there?
I mean this is beautiful, though. This really
somebody was actually there and saw it was flax and wrote down it was flax? I mean, no, come on.
Yeah.
Get out of here with that.
And even if they were, and let's say they were, why would they even include that? I mean, what
The last thing.
Yeah, I mean, that'd probably be the last thing you'd put in there.
This reminds me, I can't remember, I was in English honors in high school. We read an Indo-European story. I cannot remember the name of it. They did a cartoon movie about it later on, sometime during my generation. And it's about a swamp monster, sea monster type thing. The guys are celebrating, they're eating their feast, and the monster comes in they can't pierce its skin. They're trying to kill this sea monster fish thing. And the guy, the hero, who always, it's part of one of those myth motifs, once again, the hero ends up taking either a sword or something. He was able to rip, or maybe it wasn't with the sword, maybe he was able to rip an arm off this beast. You might know what I'm talking about if I kept going, but rips an arm off, the beast runs. It's actually the child of a mother beast. And when it goes...
Oh, is this the Grindel thing?
The what?
Grindel, the movie that had Angelina Jolie in it?
I don't know.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know, but he rips the beast arm off because the beast was so strong, and then this guy comes on. It reminds me of Hercules. It reminds me of Samson, but an Indo-European style type one. He tears the arm off of this beast. This beast thought it was going to grab him and just kill him or beat him, and he rips the beast arm off, and the beast in shock runs while bleeding, bleeds to death. And I think the mother of the beast, this sea monster, finds out that her child was killed. So she comes back for revenge. This was all, I remember reading this. It is so left field. I know I'm coming out of nowhere with this, but it just tells me that these cultural motifs and myths, they're all over the place, man. And they're all trying to tell us similar things. They may not be identical. Of course, this one wasn't identical. This was a Anglo-Saxon myth. I'm sorry, Anglo-Saxon. And I just keep seeing more of these super strong heroes, that can pull swords out of stone or can lift gates off cities and rip lions in half. It's just the same stuff. Is this really just a story that and this is one of my issues that I find with guys that deny astrotheology, or even they're like, it's celestial myth, but they don't really care to go into it. To me, it tells me these are based off what you're talking about, Michael. What you're talking about is going to the root of all of the origins of these religions. And that is what I said to Dr. Robert M. Price in his living room one night. I said, Dr. Robert M. Price, these myths seem like they're advanced storytelling of something more primitive, something that was probably more like, look up, all right, you see that? You see this? We're going to show you the story in the heavens. And he kind of looked at me sideways like, huh? He wasn't thinking like what I'm thinking, and am I wrong in thinking that way?
No, you're correct. It probably was a cosmic myth. I mean, there are a limited number of places where you would have a monster, or be like Hydra, Cetus, or maybe even Draco or something like that. I mean, is where it would be. I'm not sure of the details as to where. I have to sit down and look at it and see if I can pick something out. But yeah, I mean, it moved out about 10,000 BC or so when they started to migrate out of the Caucasus Mountains. They moved east, and they also moved north up through Germany and into the English-speaking states. So you had these separate migrations that are going on and down into to India. And then they also floated down the Tigris River and connected with the Semitic people down there. And they gave us these myths. Now, depending on how old the myth is, it would be more how common. But there's also indigenous people living in this area, in those areas, that were not part of the Indo-European migration, and so they combined their stories with the existing ones. So it's very difficult to create. You have to look at the big picture on the myths. Right. In order to try to do it with a knife is going to be well beyond my capability of doing here. I'm concentrating mostly on I know where the end point is. All right, I got the end point down. That's the Bible. That's how they got everything, and I'm relating everything to the Bible, and I can take that Bible back all the way up through the Bronze Age as to where the stories came from. And then I'm looking into Egypt now. From what we've seen, we've got the Annunciation there in Egypt, and going back thousands and thousands of years. So there's a lot of commonality, but it evolves. It changes over time, and it changes from culture to culture. And you have to be careful looking at the stories. You got to leave. There's too many people comparing Egypt to the Mayans and to Australia. Yes, there's some common symbols there. There's some commonality, but I think that's more coincidence than it is trying to draw lines.
Luther?
Back to politics. Let's look at the Jews and their celestial myths and how that changed because of certain political realities. And you've touched on this more than once in the discussion tonight. But you had Jews, militant Jews, who were fighting against the Romans for generations. And according to you, in your book, many of them were spurred by the stars. They believed that the age of Pisces would see their rulership come into play. And it obviously didn't happen. Rome won. But you say in the conclusion to your book, On Earth as It Is in Heaven, that there were 3 outcomes as a result of this. Some kept on fighting. They believed in the celestial myth, and okay, this says the Jews are going to be on top. We're going to continue to fight with Rome. Others abandoned the myth entirely. And now here's the most interesting outcome. This is the one I want you to talk about. Some of them took the astrological geography that said Judea is going to be on top, and they changed that to astrological. Michael, can you hear me? Michael, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear it. I missed the 3 points. One was
they're your 3 points. They came out of your book. That some of them
I wrote this decade ago.
True. Okay. All right. All right. You said that some of the Jews kept fighting Rome. They believed in the astrology of Pisces and that they were going to rule. You said others totally abandoned it. But I want to talk about that third group. They had astrological geography. They thought Judea was going to be on top. They changed that. It morphed into astrological anthropology. They said it's not about land, but it's about people. We're not tied to the land. It's not that we're going to dominate as people from Judea, but it's that we'll dominate as a people. That is fascinating. I want you to comment on that. How did that happen?
Yeah, that was something that, and I don't want to try to do this by sounding anti-Semitic either, but that was the idea. They were supposed to become people of the book, and they were supposed to be good citizens in whatever land that they went to live in and rise to prominence in those lands. That was supposed to be what that theory goes on, is that was their calling. Now, I'd be willing to also say that they probably lost the cosmic connection very quickly on that. And they just went on, just like Christianity has lost its cosmic connection. In looking at something we haven't even talked about was the Midrash, or the Midrashium, plural. And it took me a year to realize that the plural is Midrashium and not Midrashes. And my word spelling doesn't like either one, but that was written probably up to about 400 AD or so. And the Jews, the rabbis, wrote in there stories that contradicted or supplemented those in the Bible. And if you read that, those stories would indicate that they had a knowledge of the astrotheology on which the Bible was based on the details and how they relate them to the Greek mythology and Greek stories that are of the same constellation. So it seems to me they maintained this knowledge for several hundred years after many of them have given it up on it. That they know what the origins were as probably as late as at least 400 AD, maybe longer beyond that. I don't know when it started to fade out. And then you get into your Kabbalah era where it has a resurgence. So how much of that was original, how much was just added from the European mysticism. You know, it's a question there that you're probably not going to be able to answer.
Mm-hmm.
I love this, the thought behind this, because we've had John Knight Lunwall, who, you know, is a scholar in this field dealing with the celestial myth stuff. And he says they went from an oral peoples to a more literate, and you just verified becoming a people of the book. See, they were more ritualized in nature. Even if they did have text, they were more ritualized, and they continued the ritualization and with their, I suspect, connection to the celestial motifs. And it became more so focused on a book. They gradually kind of disconnect, plus probably not being so much of people of the land, you know. So I suspect that there's a connection between the land and the myths in the heavens. Oh, I love that picture. What do we have? What do we have here? Yeah, what do we have here?
That is from a synagogue. That is a zodiac in a Jewish synagogue. You know, the Jews who don't believe in astrology or the zodiac, if you talk to scholars, they will tell you that this is from, I'm trying to get my stuff here. Oh. Anyway, if you talk to scholars, they will tell you that this was just a common way of building temples back then. It was just part of the Greek architecture. And that's why they put it in their synagogues on the floor. They put these big, beautiful mosaics just because it happened to be part of vogue at the time. And I'm like, what? Did they get a special deal on Zodiacs that they had to put one in? I mean, you know, how did this work?
Buy one, get one free.
Now, if you go south into, I think it was in Yemen, they said, or in southern Arabia, there's a temple there. They don't have the zodiac on the floor, but they have the name of the zodiac constellations carved in the wall going around. Yeah, so you know, I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of like evidence that they, hey, there's something to this. And in the middle, you have Helios, the sun god, which is representative. The sun god would be representative of the Messiah or the coming Messiah. That would indicate these are Messianic Jews.
Ooh.
At least that's my opinion.
I like that. Because, yeah, that wouldn't make sense if this was Yahweh. It'd be a lunar god. And I like how I like that. That's an interesting idea. And scholars who've said that there are Messianic or people who are looking for the Christ, a Christ, prior to the time of what we see in the New Testament, here is this possible 1st, 2nd century BC movement of these Messianic Israelites or Jews that might be practicing all the way down through this solar angle. This is interesting.
Now, I have my own theory on this, and it's a single point theory. And I'm kind of out to lunch on it. Now, I have no evidence for anything else. I am assuming one of the things that they did back in this time and all during the Middle Ages and everything else was they made amulets. Amulets were good luck charms, and they had to make the amulets at certain times. There were specific times. For instance, if you wanted to make an amulet against a scorpion bite, you had to make it like while the sun was in Scorpio and the moon was in Cancer, or maybe it was vice versa. And you had to make it in a specific place and a specific, you know, place. You had to do this, and then you would have to have an incantation with it. And that incantation was typically a biblical scripture. And they would take those incantations, they would roll them up in a little piece of paper and tie a little string or a piece of little leather around it, and it would be with the amulet for what they needed, and they would speak these words at a specific time and place in order to get this thing to actually work. Well, it actually didn't work against scorpion bites, but that's how it would work. And I am guessing that maybe the Zodiac was a place where they might have the holy place that they would make form the little clay amulets. I don't know. I have no other information on this. This is just a wild single point theory guess that I have nothing to back up with. So that's why I'm thinking they were still using these synagogues. Because I'm not sure why otherwise they would use that.
Mm. Yeah, a whole bunch of questions come to mind, Michael. Those synagogues are beautiful. One thing is, what's the practical application? I mean, as you say, yeah, this is on the floor, but was it used as a workspace? Was it used as some sort of ground zero for an observatory, the way the larger temple was? I mean, the temple had the minarets, right? You could actually go up several stories and there observe the heavens. But the synagogues were on a smaller scale. So did you have the same type of observational concerns? And if so, was that modified? And if so, what part did the zodiacs on the floor and on the walls play in that? That's fascinating. We know almost nothing about the uses. We know that they are there, but the rest remains to be figured out.
One of the things about the Hebrews that a lot of people don't connect them to astrology is that even though the whole Bible and stuff was into astrology, they really sucked as astronomers. They were not good at it at all. That was not their field of expertise. They relied on other people to do their work for them. That was basically what that is. Our modern day astrology was set up about 800 BC by the Assyrians. Before that, whatever constellation you were in, because the constellations are not equal in size. They're not a perfect 30 degrees. All right? The Assyrians did that. They said, we're going to make each constellation 30 degrees, and screw you, Virgo, who's like 44 degrees. You're going to lose, and all these other constellations are going to gain. So they all became equal 30 degrees, and we're going to make Aries, since Aries is the first constellation of the vernal equinox, we're going to make it constellation number 1. Boom. So then when Pisces came along, Pisces is like, hey, I was 12. I should be number 1 now. It's like, nope. Syrians made Aries number 1. Aries stays number 1. We're almost into Aquarius. What is it? Oh, Aries, still number 1. That they set that the system up 800 BC, and nobody has dared change it at all. I mean, that's the way it is. Now, if you're into astrology that's real today, it's called Vedic astrology. It's based out of India. Okay, they're really into that stuff, but I'm not promoting astrology. I don't believe in astrology. I just practice looking it up. I just love ancient astrology and how it ties into everything that we did, buildings that we erected, cities and everything. I mean, it was just there, and it is something that modern day scholars have ignored. Not only do they ignore it, they know nothing about it. They know nothing about the ancient symbols. And they constantly misidentify stuff because they don't know it. I gave you one example right here with the spider rock, how they totally misidentified something that was very important. That's more important as that they find a 7,000-year-old neef than it is, a spider. And another one that they had it. Some guy. It was from Iran, ancient Iran. And it was obviously there was a bull in it. There was a bird for Scorpio, and then there was the man, I think, for Aquarius. So they had these 3 points, right? So logically, your 4th point would be Leo, right? The summer solstice. They had all these other 3. Well, Leo, the 4th drawing on there was a dog. So the scholar goes, oh, that's the dog star, okay? He did not know that in ancient Persia, Leo was a dog. And that's because they got this from the Akkadian. The Akkadians did not have a word for lion. Their word for lion was big dog. Okay, the Persians, yeah, the Persians got their astrology from the Akkadians. Okay, that's why they have a big dog for Leo. They got the actual word. So that, to me, that's like a thumbprint as to something in ancient history that you can look at and say, okay, that happened. This is where it came from. But scholars, modern scholars, they don't know the ancient constellations or who had what, so they constantly misidentify stuff in the past. I mean, when I subscribed to Biblical Archaeology Review, they had stuff in there almost every month that he's like, well, we don't know why this is. Well, why is this beehive here with Asherah? We have no idea what's going on with this. And then the serpents. Why are these serpents on this thing? It's like, come on, look at the astrology on this thing. So I try to break things down to simple, basic elements, and that's what I do. It's not that hard. It's really very simple. And people try to make it complex, and it's all you got to do is know the ancient stuff. All right.
Yeah, but Michael, you keep it moving, and you're willing to constantly revise your theories, and I think that's what makes you successful. Now,
Yeah.
you've got these two books out. I have enjoyed them. One is The Secret Astrology of the Bible, and I'm showing that because mine is a well-worn copy, guys, but it's what I have. And then the other one, On Earth as It Is in Heaven, I've got that on Kindle, but I don't have the physical copy of it. But guys, they're available on Amazon. They are well worth your checking out. I'm using it right now, both those books, as a resource in my writings on celestial mythology and scenes of stellar allegory in the Bible, particularly in the book of Acts. You don't want to be without it. And Michael Leto has no axe to grind. He's not like Robert Taylor, who got put in jail twice for talking about this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, so he doesn't have a chip on his shoulder. So, Michael, we have enjoyed our time with you tremendously. We've got to have you back on the show.
I'm so ready.
We got to wrap up.
This is Bible bloopers. I corrected the stuff in there, and now it's out on this one, A Skeptic's View of the Bible. I go into Josephus. I go into New Testament stuff. I go into the Piso conspiracy theory. I go into all these different aspects that is not in anything else that I wrote. So that
what?
Michael, you're holding out on me. I didn't even know about that publication, man. Where can we get it?
Amazon. Everything's on Amazon. The original title was Bible Bloopers. I would not recommend that because there's a lot of, I got it from using books as sources, and where the books were wrong, I was wrong. So I have stuff in there that I say as fact is actually, for a better word, urban legend, and it's wrong. So I had to get rid of it, and I had to redo the book, and I redid it, and I retitled it. So this is going into that, my first one. Do you want to do one more here?
Yeah, of course. What have you got?
One more thing. This is from a 1650 book reprint. It is the heavens, and each star has a Hebrew letter by it. And this was supposed to have been, they said the Hebrews read the stars like a book, and by assigning the letters to it. They also said the same about the ancient Babylonians. They read it like a book.
Huh.
And the way it worked is that each of these had a letter, and the planets were the vowels. Going from Mercury would be, the A or Alpha, and then E for Venus, I, Mars, O, Jupiter, and U for like the Uranus thing, which is why Moses, which was Mises, was associated with Jupiter. They changed it to an O because that's what the Jupiter thing Eve had the two E's, Venus associated with Venus. Those are just guesses. I can't do that with everybody in the book. But supposedly as the planets went through the heavens, they would also go through these different constellations that were assigned to different nations. And they would make the words up. They would use the words. They would make numbers out of them, right? And they could predict how long an empire would last. That they used this for prophecy. So this was what they did in 1650s when this book was written. It's actually a French book. I got a really bad English translation, but that's now how long were they doing that? Is that something that they developed recently, or is that something they had been doing since the Babylonians were reading the stars like a book? See, I always thought that was kind of like poetic language. It was it's just a metaphor. Yeah, they read the stars like a book. It's like, no, they actually did. There's words.
Yeah, that's really a book.
It's like, oh, okay. It's like.
I do find it fascinating that, and I've heard this said, that, the everlasting gospel, right? So in the New Testament, you have the story of the gospels, they say, is once again pre-existent. The gospel had been there. In fact, Paul acts like the gospel had been preached to Abraham. So it's like this idea that the gospel has always been in the heavens. The story of the good news has always been told as a book story in the heavens. I find that to kind of fit what you're saying in a way.
Well, that's Bullinger. I don't know if you ever read Bullinger's book. He wrote one, and there's actually some Christians that follow Bullinger. I picked his book up. His is the New Testament in the heavens. I disagree with what he has found for both the New Testament. I think it's more Old Testament. But I used his book basically for his Hebrew. What he does is he takes the Arabic name of the stars and he looks at the nearest Hebrew word that would be associated with that Arabic name. And then he uses that as his basis for that star, and he translates it into a story of the New Testament. It's interesting. I don't know. I kind of question his methodology, but I know that it works in some cases when I was using it in my Old Testament work. For instance, around Libra, it worked very well where he did that aspect. But some places it just doesn't quite work out the way I thought it would.
We're going to latch on, Michael, to the idea of the constellations being consonants and the planets being the vowels. We're going to get more. We're going to get into considerably more depth on this theory because I think it's just fascinating. When we have you on next time, tell us how viewers can get a hold of you.
Well, that's basically the theory right there. I don't know how much more depth I can go into it.
Well, you will be by the next time we talk to you, though. I'm sure
because I am not going to sit here and try to figure out words and because I'm looking at this picture. I mean, the constellations aren't drawn in, so I got no way to figure out which stars are what. Wow. I'm looking at this as like, I mean, heck, this could be, from another planet, and the aliens thought this thing up. I have no idea.
Michael, but if somebody wants to help, figure this out.
I know what happened to the space aliens.
Okay, what happened to them, Michael?
What happened to the space aliens? If you look at the pictures of all these space astronauts, right, with their helmets on and their garb and everything else, right, they're getting ready, they're going out in space. They're not wearing any shoes. Hey, I know they're gone. They died out. They didn't have shoes.
Yeah.
And all God's children need space shoes.
That's what it was. That's it.
That's right. That's what the song says. All God's children got space shoes. Yeah. When I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes. When we get to heaven or some such thing, Mike, we'll be able to be a lot closer on the meaning of all of this. Thanks so much for being with us. Do you have an email?
Uh-oh. Luther.
Uh-oh. Yes.
Yeah.
Email.
How do people get a hold of you, Mike?
Well, when you finish your task and make your discovery by taking your penny pencil and drawing in some ancient stuff, and you make a monument discovery, and you want to contact me with it, so that I can use it in my next book and not give you any credit.
Right.
We could do that.
How does that happen? Yeah. How does that happen?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's a simple email address. It's Mike Leto at AOL.com. I've had that same email address since 1998.
All right, Mike Leto, Ledo. Join us next time. Mike, wonderful having you. We are out of here. Derek, you got anything to end with?
Hope you guys like the show. I really appreciate it. Next time, we're going to delve into some of the other stuff you mentioned, Piso theory. Let's talk about how these stars correlate to the lands and maybe theories around that. Not saying you have all the answers, but it'll be an interesting discussion. And if you like what you hear, once again, go visit the PayPal, the Patreon. It helps us to bring you more shows like this. Thanks a lot, guys. MythVision, Derek Lambert, Dr. Luther G. Williams, and our guest, Michael Leto. Thank you for joining us, brother.
You're welcome.
Awesome guy.
All right.